It began like nothing. That's how the worst days always start. A woman walked into a federal courthouse, calm, composed. Her coat collar neatly folded, breath curling softly in the morning chill, the kind of presence you pass on the street. And sense, without knowing why, that she's not someone to underestimate. But the guards at the door didn't see that. They didn't see her. They saw skin, coils of silver hair, silence. And that to them was a threat. Before she could speak, she was stopped. Before she could explain, she was dismissed. And before she could resist, she was surrounded. "Step out of line!" one officer snapped. His voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. He wasn't asking. The woman didn't flinch. She asked a simple question, steady and reasonable. "Is there a problem, officer?" But the problem wasn't her ID. It wasn't security protocol. It was her presence. The way she stood. The way she didn't shrink. The way she looked like she belonged. He muttered something about no visible ID and ignored the judiciary badge she calmly held up. He took it anyway, pocketed it like it was nothing. Her name, her title, her authority, all vanished with the flick of his wrist. She asked for it back. He smirked, called her sugar, and led her away like a criminal, no cuffs, just control. Down a hallway the public never sees, through a door that slammed shut behind them like a verdict, into a windowless room that reeked of power misused. There was a chair, cold, metal, centered like an interrogation prop. There were clippers humming low, already plugged in. And there were eyes, watching, waiting for her to break. She told them it was unlawful. She said clearly and calmly, "I do not consent." But they weren't listening, they never were. One man called her suspicious. Another joked about what might be hiding in that curly mop. When she stood her ground, they pushed. Not hard, just enough to let her know. We could if we wanted. Sit down or be forced. Choose your humiliation. She sat, not out of fear, but calculation, because she knew something they didn't. The clippers touched her scalp, and then silence, not theirs, hers. They laughed as thick curls slid to the floor. They made jokes. They mocked her attitude. But she said nothing. Not because she was weak, because she was watching. Recording every second, every insult, every stolen inch of dignity, and storing it somewhere they couldn't see. By the time it was done, they thought they'd broken her. They thought they'd put her in her place, but they didn't realize the woman they just stripped, degraded, shaved down like a suspect, wasn't a suspect at all. She was the judge, and in less than 10 minutes they'd be standing in her courtroom watching her take the bench. And this time, she wouldn't be the one being judged. This time everything would change. The sun was just beginning to stretch across the rooftops of Lexington, Virginia, spilling a soft, amber hue over the federal building steps. The wind rustled the leaves of the oak trees that lined the plaza, and the air carried that distinct, early morning chill, sharp enough to sting, quiet enough to still the noise. The city hadn't woken up yet, just the rhythm of distant traffic, the occasional chirp of birds, and the deliberate echoing tap of heels on polished stone. Judge Imani Rodas parked her silver Toyota Avalon in her usual spot, 3 rows from the west side entrance. She didn't rush. She never did. Everything about her movements that morning, the way she adjusted the collar of her deep navy coat, the way she cradled the slim leather case in her left hand, spoke of precision. Discipline, presence. Her silver curls were tucked neatly back, framing a face that gave nothing away. She didn't wear her robe to work, never had. It was a rule she kept to herself, one that had nothing to do with tradition and everything to do with principle. She wanted to walk into that building as a citizen first, not a title, not a symbol of power, but a woman with purpose. That choice, that deeply personal, deeply human choice, would cost her everything in the next 10 minutes. She stepped through the courthouse doors like she had 100 times before. The security line was short, standard. A metal detector buzzed softly in the background. A young woman with tired eyes scanned IDs without much interest. Another officer adjusted his belt, flipped a clipboard, barely looked up. But then there was him, Deputy Colton Briggs, mid-40s, broad-shouldered, face like carved asphalt, cracked in places, weathered in others. The kind of man who walked like he owned the floor he stood on. He looked at Imani like she was out of place, and worse, like she didn't know it yet. His eyes flicked to her curls, to the badge tucked in her coat, then back to her eyes, sizing her up the way men like him had always done, not just as a person, but as a problem to be corrected. He stepped forward before she even reached the scanner. "Ma'am," he said sharply, his voice carrying that tone, the one designed to draw attention, to flex control in front of a crowd. "I'm gonna need you to step out of line." Imani paused, just briefly. Not out of surprise, she'd seen this kind of thing before, but she looked at him the way a seasoned surgeon looks at a tumor, measuring, observing, assessing whether to cut now or later. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. He just stared, slow, deliberate, up and down, the silver coils, the tailored slacks, the calm that didn't budge. That unnerved him more than anything. "No ID visible," he muttered, already convinced of his script. "You think you can just walk up in here dressed like some fancy lawyer or something?" "Not how it works, sweetheart. She didn't flinch. That would have been too easy. Instead, she reached inside her coat and pulled out her federal judiciary badge, slowly, calmly, as if every move was part of a ritual she'd performed 1,000 times. She held it up just high enough to catch the light. Briggs didn't even glance at it. He snatched it from her hand like it was lint and slid it into his pocket. No request, no acknowledgement, just possession. "I'd like that returned." She said, her voice still composed, but colder now, like glass, not ice. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the stale bitterness of yesterday's coffee on his breath. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "In a hurry to get somewhere. Sugar?" The insult was quieter now, but it hung heavier in the air. Nearby, a younger guard shifted his weight uncomfortably. He had seen the exchange, felt it, but he said nothing. Imani could feel the silence press around her like a second skin, a silence that didn't protect, only allowed. "I need to get to a courtroom," she said. Briggs cut her off with a scoff. "Then you'll follow my procedure? Random check, let's go." Random, a word so often used to disguise a choice that had already been made. Before she could speak, his hand was on her arm. Not hard, not bruising, but firm enough to remind her of who had the keys in this hallway. He led her away from the line, past whispers and lowered eyes, down a narrow corridor that felt longer than it was. Her heels clicked against the floor, the only sound between them. The deeper they went, the more removed the space became, from cameras, from witnesses, from any version of due process. The door closed behind them with a mechanical thud. She was alone. The room was cold, bare. A single metal chair in the center, a stainless steel cart with fingerprint scanners, and on the corner, already set out, the clippers, plugged in, waiting. Her pulse quickened, but her voice remained even. "I do not consent to this. You have no cause to detain me. This is unlawful." Briggs didn't even bother with pretense. He folded his arms and said flatly, "You're acting suspicious." 2 more officers entered behind him. One tall, bold, and jumpy. The other younger, clutching the chair like it might run. Imani stayed standing. "This is a violation," she said louder. "I want all your names." No one answered. The clippers buzzed to life, a low hum, mechanical and menacing. "What are you doing?" she asked again, stepping back. "Standard. Protocol," Briggs sneered. "You could be hiding something in that curly little mop." They didn't need permission. They had power. One officer moved behind her, hands firm on her shoulders. She didn't scream, she didn't thrash. That would have given them what they wanted. She sat, because she knew this wasn't surrender. It was strategy. The first curl hit the ground like a fallen flag. Then another, then another. Her breath stayed even, but her fists clenched so tight her knuckles whitened. The clippers traced her scalp with cruel efficiency, stripping away more than hair. They were taking her history, her pride, her shield. She didn't cry. She didn't even blink. "Looks better already," one officer muttered. "Should have come in without that damn attitude." Briggs brushed stray hairs off his uniform. "Now you look like someone who knows her place." Imani turned her head. "Finally!" Her voice was sharp, cold, and clean. "You'll regret this." He leaned in close, mocking. "Yeah, people like you always say that, then walk off like good little girls. That's how it goes." He opened the door, nodded lazily. "Courtroom's that way, Mom. Don't be late." She stood, slowly, deliberately, picked up her case, retrieved her badge from his desk without asking. Her steps echoed back up the hallway. But this time, they weren't soft. They were carved in fire. Not with shame. Not with fear, but with fury, controlled, calculated. Quiet as judgment, because in less than 10 minutes that same hallway would witness the reversal of everything he thought he controlled. And when Briggs saw her again, this time at the bench, it wouldn't be anger that broke him, it would be silence. The hallway outside Courtroom 3B was silent, too silent for a Monday morning. The kind of silence that stretches tight across the walls, not for lack of sound, but from people holding their breath. Judge Imani Rodis walked it alone. No escort. No robe. Her scalp still tingled beneath the artificial courthouse lights, the sting of raw skin like a heartbeat beneath the surface. Her steps were slow, not from hesitation, but intent. Each one deliberate. Each one echoing like a drumbeat. Through the hush, behind her whispers didn't dare rise. Clerks looked up and then quickly looked down again. 2 secretaries standing at the side entrance froze as she passed. One opened his mouth to speak, to apologize maybe, but thought better of it. The other simply turned away, ashamed of the mourning he hadn't stopped, because they'd seen it. They had watched her, the judge, dragged like a criminal down that hallway hours earlier. Had seen the curls fall, the silence harden, the dignity stripped. But now she was walking back the same path. Upright, bareheaded, unflinching. And everything had changed. Inside the courtroom, the buzz died instantly as the doors opened. Conversations stalled mid-word. Pages stopped rustling. Chairs stopped shifting. It was as if the room itself had forgotten how to breathe. The woman who entered wasn't the same one who had been led away. Her curls were gone. Her presence was not. She walked the aisle not like someone returning, but like someone reclaiming. Past rows of attorneys, journalists, plaintiffs, and defendants, some staring, some unable to, until she reached the judge's bench, and then she paused. Her robe lay folded neatly over the back of her chair. She had left it there the night before, waiting. In one smooth motion, Imani picked it up, unfolded it, and put it on, in front of everyone. The fabric slipped over her shoulders like armor. Her spine straightened beneath it, not as a performance, but as a declaration. Across the room, Deputy Colton Briggs stood near the side wall. His face was pale now, uniform stiff, hands twitching slightly at his sides, and when their eyes met, he froze. His mouth parted, as if he meant to speak. But no sound came. She didn't look away. Didn't blink. "Is the docket ready?" she asked. Her gaze still fixed ahead. A clerk, voice trembling, stammered. Yes, Your Honor." Imani nodded, then lowered herself into the chair. The bench creaked beneath her, but the silence in the room held steady, taut like a wire. "We will begin with preliminary testimony," she said evenly. "Case 487L, charges of excessive force, civil rights violations, and abuse of power." A ripple of disbelief flickered across the room, barely contained, but no one spoke. The prosecutor rose and called the first witness, Joseph Banner, H.E., retired Army vet with a limp and a wrist brace. He took the stand slowly, each step pained, but his voice clear. He told of the protest, how he stood holding a sign that read, "Justice is patriotism," how Officer Darren Voss had shoved him, hard, cracking ribs, leaving him wheezing in the gutter, how when he cried for help, they told him he was faking it. Imani didn't interrupt, didn't react. She wrote with measured strokes of her pen, ears occasionally flicking toward the defense table, where the accused officers sat, their expressions locked in stone. But in the far corner, Briggs. He couldn't stop fidgeting, His foot tapped. His hands trembled slightly near his utility belt, which he wasn't supposed to be wearing in a federal hearing. Still, she said nothing. The second witness came forward, a young woman, no more than 20, described being slammed against a patrol car for filming the police during a traffic stop. Her voice shook. Her eyes flicked to Imani, as if unsure if the woman who wore the robe now was safe to speak to. But when she looked back, she saw not pity, not sympathy. She saw clarity. Imani called a recess. The room emptied in quiet waves. Lawyers whispered, reporters typed with frantic fingers. The air buzzed with tension, but no one dared voice it, and when only her clerk, 2 bailiffs, and Briggs remained, she finally broke the silence. "Deputy Briggs," she said. The air snapped. He froze mid-step, turned slowly. "Yes, Your Honor." "Step forward," he swallowed. "Ma'am," I said, "step forward." Each step he took toward the center of the courtroom sounded like a countdown. "State your full name for the record." C. Colton. "Briggs? How long have you served as a courthouse security officer?" 18 years, she tapped her pen once, then again, then set it down. "And in those 18 years, she said softly, how many women have you physically handled without cause?" He blinked. I don't. "You heard me." He looked at the bailiffs, at the clerk. "I didn't know. I didn't realize you were." She cut him off. "And if I hadn't been..." Her voice rose slightly, not loud but piercing. "What then? Would it have just been another morning?" Another black woman dragged into a side room, shaved down like a threat. He opened his mouth, closed it, her eyes locked on his like a scalpel. 12, she said. 12 complaints, all filed against you, all dismissed, all buried. Because no one had the title or the power to make them stick, until now. His hands began to tremble. She stood. "Effective immediately," she said. "You are suspended from this courthouse." Briggs stepped back. Wait. She didn't blink. "Formal charges have been submitted to the Department of Justice. You will not wear that badge again. You will be escorted out in handcuffs, and you will answer fully. Not because I am a judge, but because I am a citizen. And this is my courthouse too." She turned to the bailiffs. "Escort him." They moved. In silence, no resistance, just the metallic click of the cuffs locking. Briggs didn't speak, didn't shout. He looked at her one last time, eyes wide, not with guilt, but disbelief, because men like him had always walked away, but not today, not under her watch. He was walked out the same way he had taken her, down that hallway without explanation, without dignity, and in his place, silence settled. But it wasn't empty. It was final. No one clapped. No one cheered. But everyone in that room felt the shift. The courtroom hadn't just witnessed justice, it had become it. Imani didn't move. She remained standing, unbroken. The air felt heavier now, not with grief, but with something older. A reckoning. A weight pressing down on every table, every seat, every conscience. The walls hadn't changed. The ceiling fan still clicked. The same sunlight streamed through the windows, but the courtroom was different. It no longer felt like a chamber of procedure. It felt like a battlefield, and Judge Imani Rodis, stripped, exposed, humiliated, had returned not as a victim, but as a force, a quiet storm, and the fight had only just begun. The sky over Lexington turned a hard grey by early afternoon. Not the lazy grey of fog or the promise of rain, but the kind of grey that pressed down on rooftops like a warning. Something was about to shift. Inside the courthouse, the air was electric. Clerks moved briskly between file cabinets. Phones buzzed quietly in sweaty palms. Doors that usually stayed open creaked shut behind hushed conversations. The building hadn't changed physically, but it pulsed now, like a living thing holding its breath. Judge Imani Rodis sat alone in her chambers, the robe that had once cloaked her authority now draped over the back of her chair. She didn't reach for it. Her scalp, raw and exposed, itched beneath the weak airflow of the overhead vent, but she didn't scratch. In front of her lay a sealed envelope, still unopened. The Department of Justice seal gleamed beneath the fluorescent light. Its weight seemed heavier than mere paper, because inside wasn't just a report, It was the start of something bigger. She hadn't opened it yet because she already knew what it contained. Then came the knock. 2 soft raps, careful. Her clerk, Jasmine, peeked in. "Judge," she said, voice lowered, "Reverend Hill is here, says he won't stay long." Imani nodded. Just once. That was all it took. When the Reverend entered, the air changed again. He wasn't loud, and he wasn't young, but his presence moved like thunder through silence. A tall man with a grey beard and eyes that had seen too much pain to be easily startled. He looked at her the way no one else had that day. Not with pity, not with fear. Just recognition. "You all right?" he asked softly. She gave a breathless laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Define all right." He didn't smile, but he understood. Then he held out a folded sheet of paper, the edges worn, the ink slightly smudged. "These are names," he said. "People who came by the church after seeing the footage. Some are victims, some just need to be heard." They said, "If you're ready, they are too." She took the list. Their names were scrawled in different handwriting, ages beside each, a few notes. 2009. My son. I still have the hospital bill. He made me take off my headscarf. Her fingers trembled slightly. She nodded. "Thank you." Reverend Hill placed a steady hand on the folder. "We've got your back. Whatever comes next, you won't face it alone." When he left, the silence returned. But it wasn't empty. It was sacred, and in that silence, Imani made a decision. 30 minutes later, the courtroom doors opened again, but this time she didn't wear the robe. She stepped in wearing a simple black blouse, her head bare, her walk strong. She did. Not need fabric to claim authority anymore. The room stood as she entered, not because a bailiff ordered them to, but because they wanted to, because they'd seen what she endured. And still she came back. Behind her, Jasmine followed, clutching a binder like it carried more than paper, like it carried resolve. Imani didn't sit, not yet. She stood behind the bench, scanning the room, and then she spoke. "This courtroom has endured a violation," she began. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Not just this morning, but for years, in its walls, in its silence, in the way some people were seen, and others were not." She raised the manila folder in her hand, clearly labeled. Bold black, ink. "This," she said, "is a policy proposal, effective immediately within this courthouse, and submitted to the district." She paused. Let the moment breathe. "It is called the Rhodes Reform." Pens scratched paper. Brows lifted. "No." One moved. "It will require mandatory anti-bias training for all courthouse personnel. Psychological screenings for officers, anonymous reporting channels, annual public oversight evaluations, and a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory conduct by any employee, officer, or official under this jurisdiction." One of the defense attorneys shifted in his seat. The same man who had once smirked, trying to disqualify her during a procedural motion. He didn't smirk now. "I will take this to the district council," she continued. "To the circuit. To the Senate, if I have to. Because what happened to me should never have happened to anyone. And I will make sure it never happens again. No applause. Just tension. The kind right before lightning. And let me be clear," she added, "this is not about revenge. This is about responsibility, the duty we owe to the truth, especially when it's uncomfortable." She looked out over the gallery, at Jasmine, at Sandra Kerr, still standing near the back, one hand pressed to her chest. Imani's voice dropped, not in weakness, in command. "This courthouse will no longer be a place where power hides behind procedure. We are not here to preserve the illusion of justice. We are here to deliver it." Only then did she sit, slowly, with finality. Jasmine placed the Rhodes Reform binder beside her, and the next witness was called. By the following morning, Lexington no longer felt like the same city. The storm had passed, but the streets were still damp. The concrete shimmered under a soft silver sky. And in front of the courthouse steps, a quiet line had formed. No signs, no shouting. Just people, waiting, present. Inside, the building moved with quiet purpose. Reporters spoke in murmurs. Officers walked softer. Clerks whispered less out of gossip and more out of awareness. Imani stood at her office mirror, not looking at her reflection, but through it. Her hair had already begun to grow back in uneven patches, but she didn't cover. In the robe hung behind her, waiting, she didn't reach for it. There was a knock. Jasmine stepped in. Her voice steadier now. They're ready for closing arguments. Any update from DOJ? They've finished interviews. Charges against Judge Barrett will proceed. The roadist reform's already been adopted by 2 neighboring districts. Imani nodded. Not with pride, with purpose. Oh, Jasmine added, hesitating. Someone from the White House called. They want to speak with you. Something about recognition. Imani smiled faintly. Tell them I'm busy. The courtroom was packed wall to wall. People stood in the back, sat on windowsills. Students, elders, city workers, former defendants. And near the front, a teenager with a shaved head looked up at Imani with quiet awe. They exchanged a nod, a silent agreement. She tapped the gavel. Before we proceed, she said, the court would like to enter into record the following. Jasmine handed her a thick folder, complaints reviewed, violations confirmed, recommendations filed. Inside, every complaint against Briggs, every name of every official who dismissed them, all, have been submitted to the Department of Justice, the State Bar, and the Senate Judiciary Committee. No objections, just stillness. The defense may argue that my experience compromises my objectivity, she said calmly, but I would argue the opposite, that surviving this makes me more qualified to understand the weight of justice. She turned toward the courtroom. This is not just a room of judgment. It is a place of reckoning, of repair. And we will not pretend silence is neutrality. Not anymore. She called for closing arguments. They came and went, formalities. But what came next was not. The side door opened. Deputy Colton Briggs entered, now in an orange jumpsuit. No badge, no belt, hands cuffed in front. His eyes didn't search the room, he looked only at her. She didn't blink. Mr. Briggs, she said, voice steady. This court sentences you to the maximum penalties under federal law. 6 years for abuse of power. 5 years for civil rights violations. 1 year for obstruction of justice. She paused. Let it land. But that's the legal part, she added. The room stilled. Here's the human part. You spent 18 years deciding who deserved dignity and who didn't. You used fear to control, silence to protect yourself. You saw citizens as problems. But today, you are no longer shielded by a badge. She leaned forward. You will serve your time, not as an officer, not as a symbol, but as a man. Accountable. Then softly. Take him. The officers led him out. No applause. Just breath held still, not for revenge, for truth. When the doors closed, she looked up. This courtroom, she said, will no longer be a fortress. She stood. It will be a mirror. And it begins now. That evening, people lingered on the courthouse steps long after the lights dimmed, not to protest, but to witness, to be present. Imani walked out without her robe again, scalp bare. Coat pulled tight against the wind. A woman in her 70s approached. I never thought I'd live to see someone like you do what you just did, she said, her voice trembling. Imani took her hand gently. You lived it. I just had the microphone. Behind her, the same teenager pulled back their hoodie, revealing their shaved head in silent solidarity. Imani nodded. That was enough. That night, she stood on her porch as her phone buzzed with headlines from places she'd never been, but she let them wait. Because the work wasn't done. Justice didn't just have a voice now. It had a face. And that face wasn't asking for permission anymore. It was leading. Stay tuned for the epilogue, the names in the margins, where the stories hidden for decades are finally brought to light. Comment if you'd stand with her. Share if this courtroom gave, you hope, justice is not a symbol, it's a choice. The evening air wrapped the courthouse in a soft, fading hush. Lexington was quieter now, but not in the way it used to be. Not the hush of complicity or routine. This was something else. The quiet of awareness, of history tilting, of something deeply familiar being undone and rebuilt at once. On the front steps, people lingered like they didn't want to leave, not because they were waiting for a verdict, but because they had witnessed one. The kind of moment you carry with you, the kind that doesn't end when the gavel drops. Judge Imani Rodas stepped out without her robe again, her scalp bare, her breath visible in the evening chill. But there was no hiding in her posture, no shame, just the steady, commanding silence of a woman who had been broken open and decided to stay that way. An elderly black woman approached her, slow but steady, glasses slipping slightly down her nose, both hands holding a worn church hat against her chest. Her voice was quiet, trembling with reverence. "I never thought I'd live to see someone like you do what you just did." Imani reached out, took her hand, held it gently. "You lived it," she replied. "I just had the microphone, the—" Woman's fingers squeezed tighter. No more words were needed. A few steps behind her, a teenager emerged from the crowd. Hoodie pulled low, hands tucked into sleeves. They didn't say anything, they just stood there, watching, listening. Then slowly, deliberately, they pulled the hood back. Their head was shaved, not in shame, not in silence, but in solidarity. Their eyes met Imani's, and that one small nod between them said more than 1,000 chants ever could. That was the power of what had just happened, not just a reversal of roles, not just the fall of one man or the rise of one judge, but the transfer of courage across generations, the baton passing from those who endured to those who will build. Inside the courthouse, even the architecture felt different. Same walls, same doors, same creaky fan overhead, but the soul of the place had shifted. When Imani walked into her next courtroom, this time for a routine custody case, she didn't have to say a word. Everyone rose. No bailiff called them to attention. No protocol demanded it. They stood because they wanted to, because justice now had a face, and it wasn't asking for permission, it was leading. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't raise her fist, but she raised the bar. And that changed everything. This is not the end of her story. The next case will shake the system to its core. The lies run deeper, the stakes rise higher, and the silence, it won't be safe anymore. Subscribe to follow the next chapter. Comment if you'd stand with her. Share this if you believe justice should never have to ask for permission. The reckoning has only just begun.